Grizzly bear attacks are not just wilderness horror stories, they serve as stark reminders of the unpredictable nature of wildlife. When food becomes scarce or territory is threatened, these powerful animals can react with surprising ferocity. In this video, we will explore 6 chilling tales of grizzly bear encounters, from a family picnic that turned tragic to a solo kayaker's fight for survival. Join us as we delve into these harrowing stories that highlight the delicate balance between humans and the wild. In the dense emerald forests of Ussuri-Krai, Russia, a celebration turned to tragedy on May 20th, 2025. The Vorontsov and Kazantsev families had gathered at a picturesque clearing near Lake Kanka to celebrate the engagement of Nikolai Vorontsov and Anastasia Kazantseva. The remote location, approximately 30 kilometers from the village of Spasskoye, was known for its breathtaking views and tranquil atmosphere. The area had a long and complicated history with wildlife encounters. For centuries, the indigenous Udege people had respected the invisible boundaries between human settlements and the domain of the grizzly bears that roamed the taiga. However, recent deforestation and commercial activity had pushed these animals further into shrinking habitats, increasing the likelihood of dangerous encounters. That fateful Tuesday morning began with perfect weather, sunlight filtering through the canopy as 12 family members laid out checkered blankets and began preparing a traditional feast. Dmitry Kazantsev, Anastasia's 54-year-old father, had spearheaded the celebration, bringing homemade mead and his prized meat skewers. His wife had prepared baked pastries and salad, while younger family members hung decorations between the ancient cedar trees. The day's purpose was simple: to celebrate the upcoming union of 2 beloved young people, while enjoying the serene natural beauty of the Russian Far East. None suspected that their gathering would soon turn into a nightmare. At approximately 1:30 p.m., as Dmitry tended to the meat over a controlled fire, movement at the edge of the clearing drew the attention of 8-year-old Pyotr Vorontsov. The boy's excitement quickly transformed into terror as an enormous grizzly bear emerged from the tree line. Wildlife experts would later estimate the animal weighed over 400 kilograms and had been severely malnourished, with its ribs visible beneath a coat of tangled fur, a direct consequence of habitat disruption and food scarcity. Dmitry acted without hesitation, stepping between the bear and his family while urging everyone to flee. His act of protection would be his last. The bear charged, covering the ground in seconds and striking him with devastating force. He was killed instantly. What followed was chaos. Family members scattered in all directions, screaming and tripping over blankets and supplies. Valentina and her sister attempted to shield 3 children behind a fallen tree, but the bear, now in a heightened state of aggression, closed the distance rapidly. Pyotr and his 10-year-old cousin Sofia were both killed, along with their great-aunt. Nikolai did everything he could to divert the bear, throwing food, containers, even his own backpack to distract it. His selfless efforts allowed Anastasia and her younger brother to flee into the woods. Moments later, the bear turned its rage on Nikolai and his uncle Grigory. Both men were killed in a matter of seconds. The assault lasted less than 5 minutes but claimed 6 lives. The survivors, 2 children and 4 adults, fled into the forest in different directions. 16-year-old Maxim Kazantsev, who had been collecting firewood uphill, observed the horror from behind a downed log. Once the bear disappeared, he emerged cautiously, barefoot, and began the arduous trek to find help. After walking nearly 4 hours through rough terrain, he reached a remote logging encampment and raised the alarm. When responders arrived at the scene, they encountered devastation. Food containers overturned, blood-stained blankets scattered among personal belongings, and the quiet, haunting aftermath of violence. The joyful family celebration had become a tragic tableau. Search crews found the remaining survivors later that evening. Anastasia was discovered hiding in a hollow log with her younger brother, both too frightened to speak at first. Regional wildlife officers tracked the bear to a den roughly 3 kilometers from the attack site. The animal was euthanized the following day. A post-mortem analysis confirmed it was an older male in poor health, suffering from malnutrition and likely disease, factors that experts believe had contributed to its unusual and highly aggressive behavior. News of the tragedy shocked the nation and triggered renewed public debate over conservation practices, deforestation, and human encroachment into wildlife territory. In the months that followed, a regional memorial reserve was established in the area. The new protected zone introduced stricter limits on land development and logging, as well as corridors designed to minimize human-wildlife conflict. For the survivors, grief was only the beginning. The emotional aftermath proved as enduring as the physical loss. Anastasia Kazantseva would go on to establish a foundation aimed at promoting safe coexistence between humans and large predators. Her first initiative involved deploying early warning systems for bear activity in outdoor recreation areas throughout the region. The Ussuri-Krai attack remains one of the most harrowing bear encounters in modern Russian history, a chilling reminder of the delicate and often dangerous balance between human activity and the wild. What began as a celebration of life ended in devastating loss, forever altering the lives of those who escaped and underscoring the urgent need for coexistence, respect, and caution when entering the last frontiers of nature. In the remote wilderness of Montana, a former Marine lieutenant colonel embarked on a solo kayaking expedition in August 2018. After 23 years of military service, including multiple combat deployments, 52-year-old Harrison Blackwood sought solitude and recovery in one of the most isolated backcountry regions in the United States. The vast protected area, stretching more than 1.5 million acres, was a rugged expanse of mountains, alpine lakes, and pristine rivers, largely untouched since early explorers mapped the region centuries ago. Blackwood's journey began at a backcountry lake access point, where rangers observed his preparedness and military discipline. His route followed the south fork of a major river, ultimately leading to a remote tributary known for its salmon runs. Meticulous in his planning, Blackwood carried essential gear: bear spray, a satellite beacon, and an advanced first aid kit, precautions that would later prove life-saving. By the fourth day, he had paddled nearly 40 miles into the wilderness, encountering only 2 backpackers who were hiking out of the area. That evening, while setting camp near a creek locals referred to as Solitude Creek, Blackwood noticed signs of nearby wildlife: broken branches at bear height, large paw prints in the mud, and scat filled with berries and fish remains. Drawing on extensive survival training, he properly stored his food in a bear-resistant canister and placed it well away from his sleeping area. Still, he knew this was grizzly country and slept lightly, aware that the wilderness around him was alive with unseen activity. At sunrise on the 5th day, the air was crisp and silent. As he prepared breakfast near the water's edge, he spotted a massive grizzly across the creek. Based on later analysis of his photos, the animal was estimated to weigh around 700 pounds. It appeared focused on fishing, moving through the shallows with purpose. Following all safety protocols, Blackwood quietly packed his gear, intending to avoid the bear by crossing downstream. He estimated the distance would be enough to stay unnoticed. However, a sudden shift in wind carried his scent toward the bear, which instantly raised its head. Its nostrils flared as it locked eyes with the human figure across the stream. Blackwood froze. He avoided sudden movement, recalling his training. "Stay calm, don't run." For a moment it seemed the bear might lose interest, but without warning it lunged forward, crashing through the brush and into the water. He had only seconds. Drawing his bear spray, he aimed and discharged, but the bear struck him before the spray could take full effect. The impact threw him to the ground. A powerful bite clamped onto his thigh, tearing deep into muscle. Fighting through pain and adrenaline, Blackwood struck at the bear's face, targeting the sensitive nose. Momentarily dazed, the bear released its grip only to bite down again, this time on his left forearm as he raised it in defense. The assault lasted roughly 40 seconds, but for Blackwood it felt much longer. Eventually the bear retreated, possibly irritated by the lingering spray or confused by the resistance. Bleeding heavily, Blackwood assessed his injuries: a shredded forearm and a deep wound in his thigh that had narrowly missed his femoral artery. Drawing on his military medical knowledge, he applied a tourniquet and used torn clothing to bind the wounds. He administered a morphine injection from his first aid kit, then began the grueling crawl back to his kayak, over 300 yards away. The journey took nearly 2 hours, interrupted by waves of pain, nausea, and dizziness. Reaching the riverbank, he activated his emergency beacon and secured himself inside the kayak. Using the current to assist his movement, he began drifting downstream. For 3 days, Blackwood alternated between paddling when conscious and floating when he couldn't. He stayed hydrated, avoided further injury, and tied his craft to shore each night, remaining alert despite fever and infection. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, a rescue helicopter spotted his kayak. He had managed to travel nearly 15 miles downstream, Paramedics were astonished to find him conscious, severely dehydrated and infected, but coherent. His survival was attributed to his exceptional physical condition, calm mindset, and extensive training in wilderness emergencies. While recovering at a regional medical center, Blackwood did not portray the bear as a villain. He explained that the incident was a result of entering a wild animal's territory during a critical feeding season. The bear, he said, was behaving naturally. His account was later incorporated into wilderness safety programs throughout Montana, with an emphasis on preparation, respect for wildlife, and survival awareness. Blackwood emphasized that his survival stemmed not from strength alone, but from caution, planning, and humility in the face of nature's unpredictability. 6 months later, he returned to kayaking, though never again solo in grizzly territory. Locals began informally referring to the site of the encounter as Blackwood's Creek, a quiet nod to the resilience he displayed. The incident became a stark reminder of the wild's raw power. For Harrison Blackwood, the experience reaffirmed a lesson learned long ago. Survival in hostile environments is not about domination, but about respecting their rules and preparing to face them at their worst. On June 12, 2023, a specialized team of 4 wildlife researchers prepared for a routine but important mission in one of Alaska's most remote wilderness areas. The team consisted of senior wildlife biologist Dr. Eliza Montgomery, field technicians Jasper Rodriguez and Whitney Nakamura, and team lead Marcus Whitefeather. Their assignment was to install motion-activated wildlife cameras along the rarely visited northern ridge of the Toklat River Basin, a region known for its high concentration of grizzly activity. Originally established as Mount McKinley National Park, the area, now known simply as part of Alaska's protected wilderness, encompassed over 6 million acres of pristine backcountry. The section where the team would be working had remained undisturbed by human presence for decades, making it ideal for studying natural bear behavior patterns. Recent climate shifts had begun altering migration routes and feeding rhythms, prompting this expanded monitoring initiative. At 0730 hours, pilot Soren Hendrickson maneuvered a Bell 407 helicopter toward a narrow clearing on a plateau approximately 47 miles from the nearest ranger station. The landing zone, barely wider than the helicopter itself, was surrounded by dense alder thickets and stunted black spruce. As the rotors stirred the morning air, the team could see the dramatic landscape below, the braided Toklat River winding through the valley, and beyond it, the towering peaks of the Alaska Range. The helicopter touched down at 0742 hours. Their mission parameters were clear: unload equipment, establish a temporary base station for the camera system's central receiver, and deploy 12 motion-triggered cameras within a 3-mile radius. If all went according to plan, they would be extracted by helicopter at 1600 hours the same day. Dr. Montgomery and Rodriguez began unloading specialized equipment, while Nakamura secured the perimeter with standard bear deterrents, including tripwire flares intended to scare off wildlife. Whitefeather coordinated with Hendrickson on the extraction timeline, confirming weather forecasts and backup options. The helicopter departed at 0755 hours, the sound of rotors fading beyond the ridge. The first sign of trouble came around 0811 hours. Rodriguez spotted fresh bear scat near the northern tree line, still steaming in the cool morning air. Whitefeather immediately regrouped the team and had everyone ready deterrents. Standard safety protocol required making loud noise to announce human presence. The team complied by calling out and using a small air horn. What they didn't know was that a mature female grizzly, later estimated to weigh nearly 650 pounds, was sheltering with her yearling cub in a depression hidden behind dense thicket just 40 yards away. The bear, designated GF-237 in previous tracking data, had displayed tolerance for distant human activity, but had never encountered people this close to her cub. At 0817 hours, as Dr. Montgomery and Nakamura worked to position a mounting system, the female bear erupted from the underbrush. She charged with astonishing speed, closing the gap in seconds. Whitefeather shouted a warning and fired a flare, but the bear's momentum carried her directly into Nakamura, throwing her against a rocky outcrop before pivoting toward Montgomery. Rodriguez attempted to use his bear spray, but swirling winds redirected the mist, partially blinding him. The bear pinned Dr. Montgomery against a stunted spruce, its jaws clamping onto her shoulder and upper arm. Her field jacket, reinforced with Kevlar, prevented a full bite but could not absorb the crushing force. Whitefeather, remaining composed under pressure, fired another flare into the ground beside the bear. The sudden flash and sulphurous smoke caused momentary confusion. Montgomery, though injured, managed to break free and stumble toward a cluster of boulders. The Grizzly, now facing Rodriguez, charged again. Still partially blinded, he could not avoid the impact. The bear knocked him to the ground, delivering a powerful blow to the head and shoulder. Only Whitefeather's quick thinking, charging the bear while deploying a properly directed cloud of bear spray, finally drove the animal back into the thickets. The encounter lasted just under 90 seconds. In its aftermath, 3 members were injured. Nakamura sustained a dislocated shoulder and fractured ribs. Dr. Montgomery had severe crushing trauma to her left arm and shoulder. Rodriguez suffered a deep scalp laceration and concussion. Only Whitefeather remained physically uninjured. At 0826 hours, Whitefeather used the satellite phone to call for emergency extraction. A rescue helicopter arrived at 0913 hours, and medics stabilized the injured before airlifting them to a hospital in Fairbanks. All 3 survived, though Dr. Montgomery required multiple surgeries and months of physical rehabilitation. A post-incident review confirmed that the bear had a yearling cub hidden nearby, explaining her highly defensive behavior. Experts also determined that the noise from the helicopter had likely startled the animals into hiding rather than prompting them to flee, creating an unanticipated proximity between the team and the mother bear. The attack prompted a full reevaluation of field research protocols in Alaska's wilderness. New policies mandated pre-landing aerial surveys and a 30-minute waiting period after helicopter drop-offs before work begins. These adjustments aim to reduce the chance of surprising hidden wildlife, particularly during cub rearing seasons. The incident stands as a stark reminder. Even the most experienced wildlife professionals are never immune to the dangers inherent in grizzly country. In a landscape as wild and untamed as Alaska's interior, respect for nature must always come with vigilance and humility. On July 18, 2007, the pristine wilderness of a remote valley in the northern Rockies became the setting for a harsh and unforgettable lesson in wilderness regulation. 34-year-old Thaddeus Blackstone, a software engineer from Portland, Oregon, had traveled to one of America's most iconic protected areas for a week-long solo hiking expedition. Accompanying him was his 4-year-old Siberian husky, Cobalt, a loyal companion who would, through no fault of his own, trigger a life-threatening encounter that reshaped the Park Service's approach to wilderness education. Blackstone had arrived 3 days earlier, securing a backcountry camping permit for the Slough Creek Zone, one of the more remote and scenic parts of the park. Rangers at the visitor center provided the standard issue: a topographic map, bear safety pamphlet, emergency contact frequencies, and printed regulations outlining prohibited activities in designated wildlife corridors. Among the clearly stated rules was a pet restriction: no dogs allowed beyond developed areas or campgrounds. The rationale was ecological and biological. Dogs can provoke wildlife, attract predators, and leave behind scents that disrupt animal behavior. These were not arbitrary policies, but rules rooted in decades of hard data and near misses. Blackstone later admitted he skimmed the materials. He assumed, incorrectly, that the prohibition was more suggestion than mandate. He had hiked with Cobalt in other national forests and wilderness areas without incident. In his words, Cobalt wasn't just a pet, he was part of my pack. That belief, while emotionally understandable, would soon collide with nature's far less sentimental reality. On the morning of the 3rd day, under clear skies and mild temperatures, Blackstone decided to explore a narrow, lightly used spur trail, branching off the main route. Despite posted signage prohibiting pets past that point, he brought Cobalt along on a retractable leash that allowed up to 16 feet of range. The landscape was picture-perfect. Meadows brimming with summer wildflowers, birdsong echoing off distant ridgelines, and the rhythmic burble of a nearby creek. It felt tranquil, even domesticated, but such feelings can be dangerously misleading in grizzly country. Around 10:15 a.m., Blackstone stopped at a stream to refill his water bottle using a filtration pump. As he crouched beside the bank, he momentarily released the leash's locking mechanism to let Cobalt move more freely. The dog sniffed the air, ears perked, and then, without warning, lunged into the brush. The leash handle slipped from Blackstone's hand, and Cobalt vanished into thick undergrowth, trailing the rattling leash behind him. Seconds later, a high-pitched yelp rang out, followed by the heavy crashing of something large moving fast. A moment later, a female grizzly bear burst through the vegetation, roughly 400 pounds of muscle and maternal instinct, barreling directly toward Blackstone. Unknown to him at the time, Cobalt had stumbled upon her 9-month-old cub, prompting the sow's protective rage. Blackstone had no time to unclip the bear spray holstered on his belt. The bear reached him in seconds, swiping with a massive foreleg and knocking him backward onto the rocky stream bank. As he tried to sit up, she bit into his right side, fracturing 3 ribs and puncturing his lung. He curled into a defensive posture, protecting his head and neck, but her claws raked across his chest, tearing 4 deep gashes into his flesh. What likely saved his life was Cobalt's return. The husky, barking and growling with uncharacteristic ferocity, reappeared at the edge of the clearing. The bear paused, eyeing the dog and her cub's location. Seemingly satisfied that the threat had been neutralized, she delivered a final swat to Blackstone's shoulder and turned, disappearing into the forest with her cub close behind. The attack had lasted less than 20 seconds. Bleeding heavily and barely able to breathe, Blackstone reached for his emergency locator beacon and activated it. Then, with immense effort, he crawled about 50 yards uphill to a small clearing visible from the air, where he collapsed. Cobalt stayed beside him, licking his face and nudging him awake each time he started to drift into unconsciousness. Behavior Blackstone would later credit with keeping him alive. Rescue personnel arrived approximately 70 minutes later, alerted by the satellite signal. Rangers and EMTs stabilized his condition with a field thoracostomy, puncturing his chest wall to relieve pressure on his collapsed lung, and airlifted him to a trauma center in Idaho Falls. He spent over 5 hours in surgery to repair the damage and required 3 units of blood. Blackstone was hospitalized for 11 days and endured months of rehabilitation. Legal consequences followed swiftly. Blackstone was cited under federal regulations for having a pet in a restricted area, failing to maintain control of that pet, and contributing to the harassment of wildlife. The total in fines exceeded $2,500. More significantly, his actions triggered an administrative review of signage, visitor education, and enforcement practices. Wildlife advocates were vocal in their condemnation. The incident, they argued, epitomized a growing disconnect between outdoor recreation and wilderness ethics. As visitation soared in the early 2000s, more people were entering bear habitat with little understanding of animal behavior, let alone the gravity of regulatory warnings. Biologists were quick to underscore that Blackstone's case was not an outlier. In the 5 years leading up to the incident, human-bear conflicts in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem had risen by nearly 40%. Many of those incidents involved off-leash dogs, improperly stored food, or solo hikers straying from marked routes. The common denominator, a sense of exceptionality. The rules don't apply to me. Ironically, Blackstone had passed a trailhead kiosk bearing signs from a new outreach campaign called Respectful Distance, launched just weeks before his hike. The campaign warned of heightened bear activity and emphasized the pet restrictions he ultimately disregarded. Wildlife managers tracked the bear involved for several weeks using trail cameras and aerial observation. Though she displayed no further aggressive behavior, contingency plans were made in case she began associating humans or dogs with danger. Fortunately, she remained reclusive, and her cub appeared healthy. But the diversion of resources, estimated at over $37,000, delayed planned habitat restoration efforts elsewhere in the park. During Blackstone's hospitalization, Cobalt was held temporarily by animal control. Once Blackstone was discharged and cleared legally, the dog was returned to him. In public interviews used for educational purposes, Blackstone expressed deep remorse. He acknowledged that his desire to share the wilderness with Cobalt had blinded him to the real stakes of venturing into protected wildlife territory. "I broke the rules because I thought I was being careful," he said in a short documentary later produced by the Park Service. "But I wasn't careful. I was lucky. And that's not a plan." His story soon became part of visitor orientation programs across multiple parks and wilderness preserves. Park rangers began referring to it informally as the "No Dogs Allowed" story, a cautionary tale now shown in training sessions, printed in guidebooks, and even cited during trailhead safety briefings. In a strange way, Blackstone's experience achieved what thousands of signs and pamphlets had failed to do. It made the consequences real. He now speaks at wilderness safety seminars, often using his experience as a cautionary example. In his talks, he reflects not only on his physical recovery, but on the flawed assumptions that led him into danger. He emphasizes that the consequences of his choices rippled far beyond himself, endangering his dog, the wildlife, and the emergency personnel who came to his aid. His story, stripped of heroism and laid bare in honest detail, serves as a reminder that nature operates without compromise, and that the rules designed to protect it exist for good reason. In September 2021, amid the rugged wilderness of an island off Alaska's southern coast, professional wildlife photographer Maximilian Thornbridge experienced an encounter that redefined his understanding of nature's raw power. Thornbridge, 43, had captured wildlife across 5 continents, with his work featured in leading nature publications. Yet he considered the massive coastal brown bears of this remote island his white whale, a subject he had long sought to document in their most unfiltered natural form. The island, spanning over 3,500 square miles and home to thousands of coastal brown bears, the largest brown bear subspecies in North America, offered both a photographic opportunity of a lifetime and significant survival challenges. Due to geographic isolation, this bear population had developed distinctive behaviors and size traits. Adult males could exceed 1,500 pounds. Thornbridge, who had previously photographed dangerous animals in Africa, South America, and Siberia, understood the risks. Still, he believed that working solo would allow him to better integrate into the environment and observe undisturbed behavior. After securing permits from local land management authorities, Thornbridge set up a minimalistic camp near the mouth of a major river known for its seasonal salmon runs. He constructed a reinforced tent platform and stored his food, using scent reduction methods recommended by experienced backcountry guides. Rather than travel with a group, he chose solitude, believing the presence of others might affect animal behavior and reduce the authenticity of his images. On his 3rd evening, September 18th, he positioned himself in a natural blind near a well-used bear fishing site. The spot provided clear visibility of the river bend, and the final light of day cast a golden haze across the misty landscape. With a high-end telephoto lens and a silent shutter, he captured a range of activity, including a particularly large bear fishing midstream, muscles rippling with every move. As darkness approached, fog crept across the water. Thornbridge began to pack up, unaware that he was no longer alone. Behind him, a large bear, later estimated to weigh 1,200 pounds, had silently navigated the dense brush. Wildlife biologists who later investigated the scene described the animal's movement as a near-perfect ambush, taking advantage of the failing light and shifting wind direction. The first warning sign wasn't a noise, but an unnatural silence. The background rustle of birds and wind had vanished. Instinctively, Thornbridge turned, just as the bear emerged through the fog only 20 yards away. He reached for his bear spray, but the animal charged. Within seconds, it closed the gap, knocking him to the ground with a powerful strike. His camera gear scattered. As he tried to regain his footing, the bear sank its jaws into his left shoulder. According to medical professionals and survival experts who later interviewed Thornbridge, what followed was a combination of instinct and training. Recognizing that this was a predatory encounter, not defensive behavior, he understood that playing dead would not deter the animal. With his free hand, he grabbed the broken leg of his tripod, now splintered from the fall, and jammed the jagged carbon fiber tip toward the bear's face. He struck near its eye, forcing a brief retreat. In that brief window, he retrieved his bear spray and deployed it at close range. The powerful chemical cloud overwhelmed the bear's senses. It reared back, pawed at its snout, and staggered away into the fog. Wounded and bleeding, Thornbridge activated his satellite emergency beacon. His injuries were severe, puncture wounds to the shoulder, deep lacerations on his back, and limited mobility. But he remained conscious and immediately began self-treatment. Using gauze, tape, and pressure wraps from his first aid kit, he slowed the bleeding. He applied chemical heat packs to critical areas, underarms, neck, and torso, to stave off hypothermia. He insulated himself using discarded equipment packaging and used his shredded jacket to reinforce his core. To stay mentally focused, he used a strategy passed down by his father, a military survival trainer, verbalized the situation out loud every hour. He rotated his body periodically to maintain circulation and consumed electrolyte-laced water and energy bars from his gear. These actions, according to rescue officials, likely saved his life. After 4 hours, a helicopter diverted from a nearby training mission located his beacon. Despite signs of hypothermia and significant blood loss, Thornbridge remained lucid. He was evacuated to a medical facility for treatment. He underwent several surgeries and a lengthy rehabilitation. Wildlife officials later concluded that the bear had likely been tracking him for some time, possibly drawn by trace scents or behavioral curiosity. With the salmon run nearly over and winter approaching, the bear may have been exhibiting opportunistic behavior common during late-season food scarcity. Thornbridge's ability to resist, deploy deterrence, and self-administer critical care was widely praised. Wilderness safety organizations incorporated aspects of his response into updated training materials. In particular, his emphasis on preparedness, bringing a functioning beacon, organizing supplies by access priority, and staying calm, was credited with setting a strong example for other solo backcountry travelers. Among the gear recovered at the site was Thornbridge's camera, surprisingly intact. One of the final images on the memory card captured the bear's form materializing through the fog, an eerie and powerful image that would later be featured in public safety campaigns about wildlife awareness. A year after the incident, Thornbridge published a photo essay titled The Predator's Gaze. It combined the salmon season imagery with the final moments before the attack, exploring the intersection between nature's beauty and its inherent risk. The piece received widespread attention and helped spark new conversations about ethical wildlife photography, risk tolerance, and the need for adaptive safety practices in areas affected by shifting animal behavior due to climate and habitat changes. Though Thornbridge returned to fieldwork, he no longer worked alone in areas with known predator presence. In interviews, he stated that while the experience did not deter his passion for wildlife documentation, it instilled a deeper respect for the unpredictable instincts of animals under environmental stress. His story stands not only as a tale of survival, but as a case study in the fine line between human ambition and wild unpredictability. A reminder that in some places, especially those where apex predators still roam freely, nature remains the one in control. On March 12, 2012, a Norwegian research vessel was conducting scientific studies approximately 70 nautical miles northeast of Longyearbyen in the Arctic archipelago of Svalbard. The 340-foot ice-class ship was on a 3-month expedition focused on monitoring and understanding the effects of climate change on polar ice. On board were 38 crew members and 14 scientists, supported by experienced leadership. Captain Leif Erikson, a seasoned navigator with over 30 years of polar experience, had anchored the ship in a stable patch of fragmented pack ice to allow for field operations and equipment calibration. The archipelago, located between northern mainland Europe and the North Pole, had undergone some of the most drastic climate shifts in the Arctic. Winter temperatures in the region had increased by nearly 8 degrees Celsius since 1970. These changes had caused significant disruptions to sea ice patterns, local ecosystems, and animal behavior. One of the most notable effects was observed in polar bear populations, which had begun to rely increasingly on small, isolated ice floes to hunt seals, as traditional multi-year ice habitats became scarcer and more fragmented. At 0722 hours, under clear skies and frigid temperatures nearing -25 degrees Celsius, 3 members of the expedition team disembarked onto a large ice floe for sonar calibration work. The floe was considered stable and connected to the ship by an aluminum gangway. The selected team included engineering officer Magnus Larsson, marine biologist Dr. Ingrid Nystrom, and oceanographic technician Olaf Bergstrom. Each wore insulated high-visibility thermal suits and carried communications equipment, remaining in direct contact with the ship's bridge throughout the operation. Safety measures were in place. An armed watchman stationed on the upper deck of the vessel monitored the surrounding ice field through binoculars. He was equipped with both flare deterrents and a high-powered rifle, standard equipment for polar wildlife threats. The weather, though bitterly cold, was calm, with wind speeds under 10 knots and visibility extending nearly 15 kilometers. As the team worked efficiently in the low Arctic light, adjusting instruments and checking readings, an unforeseen danger lay hidden. A mature male polar bear, weighing approximately 1,100 pounds, had been resting in a snow depression on the far side of the ice floe, roughly 90 meters from the ship. It had gone unnoticed during the team's deployment. Later designated in research logs as SVB-117, the bear was believed to have been in the area for several days, based on the discovery of recent seal remains nearby. At approximately 0741 hours, while Dr. Nystrom adjusted a calibration rod and her colleagues checked readouts on a console, the bear silently began to move. Using snow ridges and uneven terrain for cover, it approached the crew with stealth rarely observed in such large predators. The lookout aboard the ship, momentarily occupied with a routine radio transmission, failed to notice the movement until the bear was less than 15 meters from the team. When the bear attacked, it did so with explosive speed. It reached Bergstrom first, striking him with its forelimbs and causing immediate and fatal head trauma. In the chaos, Larson moved to protect Dr. Nystrom, placing himself between her and the bear while using a metal instrument frame in an attempt to shield her. The effort was courageous but ineffective. The bear's next assault fatally wounded him, severing major arteries and crushing bone. Dr. Nystrom attempted to flee toward the ship's gangway, but she slipped on the ice. Before she could recover, the bear was on her, delivering a crushing bite that caused severe injuries. The entire incident unfolded in less than a minute. From the ship's bridge, the captain initiated emergency protocols. The ship's horn sounded, echoing across the ice and briefly halting the bear's advance. The noise startled the animal, which retreated approximately 50 meters. Flare rounds were then deployed in its direction, prompting it to move farther from the scene and allowing a rescue team to prepare for deployment. Conditions on the ice rapidly worsened. Winds increased to over 25 knots, and blowing snow reduced visibility to under 50 meters. Despite these deteriorating conditions, a 4-person emergency team mobilized. The group included the ship's physician, security personnel, and 2 additional armed responders. Equipped with both medical and deterrent supplies, they navigated the treacherous surface of the ice floe to reach the victims. Larson was found conscious but gravely wounded. He had sustained a severed artery and a collapsed lung, making breathing shallow and speech impossible. Emergency measures were applied, plasma expanders and hemostatic agents, but the injuries proved too severe. Before losing consciousness, he gestured weakly toward the bodies of his colleagues, an action interpreted as a final attempt to direct help toward them. The bear, meanwhile, did not leave the area as expected. It remained just at the edge of visibility, occasionally pacing or moving forward before backing away. This unpredictable behavior, sometimes seen in bears with previous human contact, complicated the rescue. The emergency team was forced to maintain defensive postures while administering aid, balancing medical urgency with the need for constant vigilance. Back aboard the vessel, tensions rose. The rescue team communicated the worsening situation, requesting authorization to permanently neutralize the threat. The ship's leadership debated the course of action, weighing ethical considerations, mission priorities, and the risk to human life. Ultimately, when the bear began to advance once more, one of the responders fired and stopped the animal before it could reach the group. All 3 expedition members ultimately succumbed to their injuries. Bergstrom and Dr. Nystrom were pronounced dead at the scene. Larson died during the attempted transport back to the vessel. The loss of life triggered the most comprehensive safety review in the history of Norwegian polar operations. An investigation identified multiple contributing factors. The bear's uncharacteristic stealth, the failure of observation at a critical moment, and a gap in wildlife response strategy were all cited. However, the most significant conclusion drawn was that warming conditions had pushed wildlife and human activity into closer, more dangerous proximity. The incident was not a failure of a single protocol, but a symptom of a rapidly changing environment. Captain Erickson was cleared of wrongdoing, but he voluntarily resigned 6 months later. In his formal statement, he reflected on the risks of experience giving way to complacency. He acknowledged that Arctic wildlife was adapting far more quickly to environmental changes than human systems were adapting to those animals in turn. In the aftermath, polar research authorities instituted sweeping changes. These included banning the use of gangways to connect with any ice floes, regardless of their perceived stability. All vessels operating in the region were retrofitted with enclosed wildlife observation decks and equipped with infrared and motion detection systems. Teams working outside the vessel were required to have multiple dedicated observers and an expanded range of deterrent equipment, including remote-deployed sound devices. The incident came to be known informally within the polar science community as the Svalbard Warning. It served as a sobering reminder that climate change is not a distant theory, but an immediate force reshaping the behaviors of the Arctic's most powerful predators. The line between predictable patterns and unknown behaviors had begun to blur, creating new challenges for researchers in the field. At the research agency's headquarters, a memorial plaque was installed bearing the names of the 3 fallen scientists. The inscription honors their service and sacrifice in pursuit of understanding a world in flux. Their deaths, while tragic, underscored the evolving risks of Arctic research and the need to remain vigilant, even in places long thought familiar.